Farlow would never forget the day Death walked into his cantina. The cosmic cantina had been in Farlow's family for 3 generations. It was once a thriving saloon on a station that saw more traffic than it could handle. Kental Station had been a major stop along the galactic hyperway during the Grug Rush, and for 80 glorious revolutions, species of every kind stopped at the cosmic cantina for one last drink before heading into the frontier. Those days were gone now. The Grug Rush was history, but the frontier remained a vast stretch of barely colonized worlds, wild, lawless, and deadly. Kental Station was still a last stop on the way to the frontier, but the frontier was now a place for the wicked and the desperate outlaws, exiles and hopeful colonists from species that hadn't yet learned better. The cantina was surprisingly spacious, and Farlow's grandsire had spared no expense with the decor. The walls were lined with hivestone, and the floor with nearly odorless lion. The lighting was dim but full spectrum, with isolation fields allowing patrons to adjust the settings on their table lamps without disturbing others. The tables and chairs were modular, designed to easily accommodate the shapes required by a variety of species. Farlow had not expected to inherit the cantina. He was one of a brood of hundreds and had fully expected to make his way through the galaxy with nothing but his wits and whatever resources he could scavenge. The calling had changed all that. Farlow was now the last of his brood. He had been tempted to sell the place, remove the grim reminder of his family's fate. Gia had convinced him otherwise. She had been right, as always. Farlow did not know why the whims of the cosmos had gifted him such a wife, but he would always be grateful. Farlow loved his cantina. He liked meeting new people, and business was just brisk enough to keep him and his family comfortable. The rise of roving gangs had become a concern, but Kental Station security forces were an adequate deterrent most of the time. When they weren't, Farlow was more than capable of dealing with the problem himself, or at least he had been so far. Farlow's gaze drifted to a table near the back of the room where 4 beings took their seats, laughing coarsely. A rough group, even by Farlow's standards, heavily armed, and Farlow's cybernetics informed him they didn't have ident badges. Outlaws, most likely. Farlow didn't care about the legal status of his customers, but something about this group made his antennae twitch. They were trouble. He'd bet his favorite gun. "I'm telling you," old Drago insisted. "It's got to be the feds." The voice snapped Farlow out of his musings. Old Drago was a Flaxian, a hairy biped with 2 arms and 3 eyes, usually orange, but Drago's hair had turned silver long ago. He and old Hyla were lounging at their usual place by the bar. They had been regulars at the cantina since the days of Farlow's grandsire. "It ain't the feds," Hyla argued. Hyla was a Philean as well, but he refused to age gracefully. His body hair had been dyed back to its original orange, sort of. Farlow hoped the old man had done it himself. He'd hate to think Hyla had paid money for such a botched attempt at youth. "It's got to be," Drago said again. 3 gangs in less than a month, and one of them the Hellies. Who else has the gigs to pull that off? "It ain't the feds," Hyla was certain. First off, the Federal Unified Worlds don't give 2 spits about the frontier or anything near it. Second, if it was them, they'd be hollering about it on every station they could broadcast, telling everyone how they bring law and order and such. No way they do anything quiet-like. Quiet-like is the word. Drago gestured at Farlow. The barkeep wandered over and refilled his glass. No witnesses, no evidence, no one even trying to take credit. And if that ain't the strangest thing, Hyla agreed. The syndicates would have left one alive to tell the tale, and if a rival gang beat the Hells, they'd be telling anyone who'd hear. No, the Philean shook his head. This has got to be somebody new. Some new player looking to make a name for themselves. Make a name for themselves, Drago smirked at his friend. By not telling anyone creates an aura of mystery. Don't it, old Hyla said sagely. People would take notice, and all the more when the Fraggas reveal themselves. That's assuming they do reveal themselves, said Drago. Could be a case of payback. Maybe the gang's pissed off some high-up corporation type, or a crime lord from Fed space. Could be. Hyla finished the glowing blue liquid in his glass. He gestured for another. All I know is, this ain't a good time to be an outlaw. Do you 2 want to talk about something else? Farlow interrupted. The group at the far table didn't seem to have heard the codgers, but that wouldn't last. Hyla and Drago were experts at picking up rumours, but they had the situational awareness of a hatchling. A dumb hatchling who was drunk. Farlow didn't want to have to rescue the old fools from yet another bar fight. Ain't nothing else to talk about, said Drago. Now, Drago, you know that ain't true, Hyla drawled. What about that fine little filly just came on the station? See her, was it Sally as my great-granddaughter? Hyla Drago gave him a look. Well, she ain't mine, Hyla smirked. She's already got 2 husbands, Dragoited out. Why would she want a third? Especially one as ugly as you, ugly, Hyla snorted. That ain't what your wife said. Gia hates you, Drago reminded him. No, not her. Your other wife. Satisfied that the old men were back to harmless bickering, Farlow turned his attention to the rest of the room. There was a decent crowd tonight, almost 20 people. Farlow's wife, Gia, flitted from table to table, delivering drinks and taking orders. She moved with delicate grace, wiggling her antennae with playful charm and leaving smiles in her wake. By the uplift, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. 4 slender arms extended from her thorax, tipped with long, sensual fingers. Her exoskeleton was a pale lavender, smooth and iridescent. Her multifaceted eyes were the perfect shade of red, and her wings fluttered ever so slightly when she laughed. She'd had her antennae modified to give off a soft pink light. Yo, one of the denizens of the outlaw table shouted at Gia. Bug. Come here, the speaker was a rondar, a hulking brute, brown in colour. Instead of a head, he had a large mouth and a single eye in the centre of his abdomen. Rondar produced asexually, and they tended to refer to themselves and everyone else as male. That's a girl, Claude, one of the other outlaws, told him. This one was a gizm, a tiny creature, barely 12 centimetres around. Like most of its kind, it used a 2-metre mech suit to interact with the world. Farlow saw the thing snickering through the opening in the mech's chest. Green zist are male, purple zist are ladies, shut up, Melno Claude roared. Since his species cloned themselves for reproduction, nearly all rondar were the same voracious, ill-tempered, and not very bright. This one did not appear to be an exception. What did I say about correcting me? You said genders are confusing, and you could use the help, Melno told him seriously. Claude scowled. Well, I changed my mind. Shut your mouth hole. Both of you, shut your mouth holes, the third member piped up. This one was a Skarl, tall and skinny, with yellow scales and a tail that ended in a venomous sting. Like Farlow, she had 4 arms, but she also had 6 legs and a set of long serrated pincers. You're making a scene, she snorted. Can't you see this is a high-class joint? The other 2 chuckled at the joke. The 4th member smiled at Farlow's wife. Ignore these idiots, little lady. Why don't you come on over and we'll tell you what we want? Farlow marked this one as the leader. He was a grotto, a 2-armed biped, much larger and wider than most species. Thick plates covered most of his body. They were a deep blue with glowing swirls of gold engraved upon them. Concerned, Farlow made a quick scan with his cybernetics. It was as he feared. The grotto's armour had been extensively modified. A mixture of titanium and ceramic had been used to increase durability, along with an energy-conductive alloy to lessen damage from blaster fire. It was an expensive, exclusive process reserved for the upper nobility of his species. A normal grotto was dangerous, but a noble was much worse. They were full of cybernetic enhancements and hidden weapons, but their personal lethality paled in comparison to what they represented. Anyone foolish enough to kill a noble would be hunted to the ends of the galaxy. Grotto nobles were incredibly vengeful. It was their favourite pastime. Gia flitted over, taking orders and making small talk. Farlow used his cybernetics to listen in and had a platter with the drinks ready when she came back to the bar. Thanks, sweetie, she tittered, leaning in to nuzzle her antennae against his. Farlow wrapped his arms around her for a moment, breathing in her sweet pheromones. He'd been with her for 8 revolutions, but she never failed to make his head spin. He watched her take the tray, her wings fluttering with a naughty whisper as she walked back to the far table. Farlow pulled his gaze away long enough to give old Hyla another refill. An outraged shout snapped his attention back to his wife. What did you say, Bug? It was Claude, the rondar. I said that will be 27 gongs, Gia repeated. You hear that, boys and girls? The grotto gave an evil sneer. The Bug thinks we should pay for our own drinks. If you do not pay, Gia said firmly, I will have to call security, the grotto jeered. You do that, little lady. Tell them the Brill gang's ready and waiting. The bottom dropped out of Farlow's stomach. The Brill gang. They'd only been operating for 2 revolutions, but they were the most feared bunch of outlaws in the frontier. Even the hardest criminals only dared speak of them in whispers. Some outlaws were vicious, some were well armed, some were well connected. None were more vicious, armed or connected than the Brill gang. Go on, Bug the Grotto urged. Farlow realized it must be Brill himself. Gia frowned at the Grotto but did as he asked. The security station did not answer. See that, Bug Brill leaned close to the woman. The gang and I already paid a visit to security, had us a nice chat, came to an understanding, you see. That's as maybe said Gia. Farlow called out to her to stop, but she didn't want to hear it. But if you're not going to pay, you will no longer be welcome in the cosmic cantina. Brill laughed, his backhand sending Gia crashing through one of the tables. Farlow was over the bar and between the two of them before the Grotto took another step. All 4 of his guns centered themselves on Brill's chest. I'll give you one chance, Farlow growled. Leave now, and if I don't, Brill asked. He gestured at his carapace. You know what these sigils mean, I do, said the barkeep. They mean after I kill you, I will go to your ship and kill your men. Then I will take your ship and fly to Grotto Prime. Once there, I will kill as many of your kin as I can. Before I die, his wings vibrated with an ominous hum. Or you can leave now. Brill regarded Farlow with a serious expression. That's a zarn of a threat, Bug. You really think you can back that up? You'll be dead either way, Farlow assured him. That's so, Brill grunted. Well, you got gigs, Bug, I'll give you that. You ever kill a man before? I fought as a captain in the calling, the barkeep told him. The bug hunt, Brill smiled. Not a lot of your kind survived that dust up. You must be a bona fide badass. The smile disappeared. Too bad you didn't learn nothing. Bugs get squashed when they're too big for their britches. That was the whole point of the war. Farlow didn't waste more time on conversation. His cybernetics had already calculated a firing solution. The Grotto carapace would stop the disruptors in his top set of hands. The iron bolter in his lower right wouldn't fare much better. It was made for dealing with machines. His bottom right gun was a phased disintegration cannon. It was designed to vaporize dense material. He pulled the trigger on that one first, and the other 3 a tenth of a second later. Nothing happened. Yet Brill nodded. You got gigs. All right, he slid open a panel in one of his armored plates. A small, blinking device revealed itself. Farlow barely stopped himself from gasping in alarm. It was a nullifier. Farlow had come up against nullifiers a few times in the war. Fancy federal tech. They shut down all weapons in a 300-meter radius, turning every battle into a melee. The feds kept a tight grip on the devices. They were almost unheard of out in the frontier. Farlow dropped his guns. They wouldn't do him any good. Instead, he pulled out his breaking sticks, rods of pure tungsten, 1 meter long and 7 centimeters thick. Farlow's species had lost many of their natural advantages when they were uplifted. They needed more food now, more oxygen, and they lost their claws and stings in exchange for thumbs and the ability to speak. Their strength had not been taken. Farlow could lift over 20 times his body weight. He would die, he knew that. He might take an enhanced noble Grotto in an even fight, but the other 3 made it a death sentence. It didn't matter. He would kill Brill or die trying. Either way, Gia would have time to escape. He shifted, preparing to leap. A flash of light, heat, and searing pain stopped Farlow in his tracks. He stared down in shock at the charred stump where his arm used to be. Then he looked up. Brill was holding a plasma caster. Here's what's going to happen, Bug. Brill kept his caster leveled at Farlow. You're going to get back behind that bar. You're going to keep that booze coming. And you're going to thank your lucky stars I don't feel like pouring my own drinks today. The rest of the gang will be here in an hour or 2. And you're going to get us all good and drunk. His eyes glittered with malice. Do that, and maybe, just maybe, I won't kill you and the missus here. I think we should take that bug too, Claude spoke up, pointing at Farlow's wife. I hear zist eggs is good eating for the last time. Claude Melno snapped. That's a girl. Bugs don't lay eggs, ignore those idiots, Brill ordered. His weapon never wavered. What's it going to be? Farlow trudged back to the bar, thinking furiously. Brill didn't just have a nullifier, he had a selective nullifier. Farlow had only heard rumours of such a thing. They were used by high-ranking feds, and no one else. Farlow had no idea how Brill had acquired such a device, but it didn't matter. Brill's guns worked, Farlow's didn't. It was as simple as that. He tried calling security himself, no answer. Farlow looked around the cantina. Most of the customers had cleared out. Only Drago and Hyla had stayed. They'd help if they could, but Farlow knew it wouldn't amount to much. He was on his own. Farlow poured drinks and made plans. He knew it was useless. Brill would kill him. His wife would be taken. Farlow could fight, he probably would, but he couldn't win. He would die, and no one would lift a hand to save him. He was handing Gia a third round of drinks when the human walked in. A male specimen, just over 2 meters tall. He wore black boots, black pants, black shirt, a long black coat, and a black hat with a wide brim. The human paused just inside the door. Farlow assumed he was letting his eyes adjust to the dim light of the cantina. Then he strode forward, long, confident strides, his eyes darting around the room, taking in everything. No profile appeared in Farlow's cybernetic interface. The human didn't have an ident badge. Farlow wasn't surprised humans had only made their way into space some 20 revolutions ago. The feds didn't acknowledge them as citizens. Farlow's cybernetics scanned the creature. He wore no armor, had no cybernetic enhancements. The only power sources Farlow detected were a pocket full of gongs and a basic communicator. Farlow hadn't dealt with humans often, but he knew enough to know that they had no natural weapons. They were slower and weaker than most species. This one moved like a predator, all grim and graceful, but Farlow knew better. No power sources meant no weapons, at least none used at range. Perhaps this one was a melee specialist. He was either that or a fool. Kental Station was as close to safe as could be found near the frontier, but that wasn't saying much. No one went unarmed. Even old Drago and Hyla kept blasters on their person at all times. Those who failed to do so rarely lived long enough to regret it.